Hello, Prof. Dylan. For my presentation today, I'll be covering on the topic of Singapore's foreign policy approach towards China. First, I will give a brief background on bilateral ties between the two nations and then elaborate on the significance of China to Singapore. I will then introduce five core principles that guide Singapore's foreign policy and explain how it applies those principles in its approach towards China. Now, I will start on a brief historical background on Singapore China relations. After gaining independence, Singapore initially continued to recognize the Republic of China as the legitimate government of China due to its ideological opposition towards communism. However, as the PAP government stabilized the local communist situation and China began reforming economically under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, unofficial ties between Singapore and the PRC started to form in the 1970s. Subsequently, formal diplomatic relations were established on October 1990, and Singapore switched recognition from the ROC to the PRC as the legitimate government of China, which significantly improved ties between the two countries. As of 2025, both sides will mark the 35th anniversary of bilateral relations. As with current international relations discourse, most countries' foreign affairs, including Singapore's, seem to focus heavily on China, which raises the question: why does Singapore seem to give more weight and attention to its relations with China? This question can be answered by understanding the significance of China to Singapore. First, China is a major player in Singapore's economic sector, with it being Singapore's largest trading partner since 2013 and having multiple major joint government-led investment projects. China also has historical and ethnic links to the population of Singapore, stemming from the significant number of local ethnic Chinese diaspora and a sizable number of its citizens working and studying in Singapore. Lastly, China is recognized globally as an economic and military powerhouse, which Singapore cannot simply ignore. However, despite enjoying generally friendly relations, Singapore and China do have existing bilateral issues that can affect the status quo. Singapore has on several occasions encountered difficulties maintaining a cordial relationship with China. One key event occurred in 2016 over the detainment of SAF's terrorists in Hong Kong. Despite China's denial, it was rightly assessed that the detainment was motivated by Chinese displeasure over Singapore's statement regarding the Arbitral Tribunal Award considering a dispute between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea. The statement was seen to be opposing China's claims in the region, which caused unhappiness amongst the Chinese media and people. Other issues such as Singapore's partnership with the US military in light of the US-China rivalry and its existing ties with the Taiwanese government has resulted in China issuing strongly worded diplomatic statements to Singapore in the past. Lastly, there's also a growing concern of Chinese state-sponsored interference in Singapore's domestic politics. As these issues are all still prevalent in today's geopolitical environment, it can be assumed that these issues can cause tensions to arise between the two nations. With this context of bilateral ties, I will now touch on the principles that Singapore attempts to adhere to when formulating its foreign policy approach towards China. In a 2017 speech to 200 civil servants, Singaporean Minister for Foreign Affairs, Vivian Balakrishnan, mentioned five core principles of Singapore's foreign policy that have served Singapore interests well since independence. Briefly, the five core guiding principles are: number one, maintaining a successful and vibrant economy; two, not becoming a vassal state; three, being a friend to all but enemy of none; four, promoting a global world order; and lastly, being a credible and consistent partner. Upon deeper observation, we can see these five principles being implemented in Singapore's approach towards China. For the first principle, maintaining a successful and vibrant economy plays a crucial role in allowing Singapore to live up to its belief that being exceptional is necessary for its survival and prosperity. Exceptionalism also allows Singapore to merit attention from bigger powers such as China. A successful economy allows Singapore to be viewed by China as a safe, stable, and efficient party to be invested in, which will lead to China having vested interests in keeping Singapore stable. This ties into the liberalist idea that economic interdependence between two countries will reduce the chances of both sides turning hostile against each other. Some examples of this principle in action are the joint government-to-government projects in Suzhou, Tianjin, and Chongqing, and Singapore being included in the Belt and Road Initiative and the signing of the China-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. Second, the principle of not being a vassal state to any nation is also prevalent in how Singapore portrays itself towards China. Singapore has actively applied this principle by trying to project itself as a sovereign state, by making decisions that might not align with China's interests. A prominent example is the decision to not terminate military exercises with Taiwan, despite Chinese offers to offer an alternative location for SAF's training needs. In other instances, Singapore's foreign delegation uses English as its main form of communication in official meetings with their Chinese counterparts, even though several key members of the delegation can speak Mandarin. Even such subtle actions can project one's status as a sovereign nation to dispel misconceptions that Singapore is a part of China due to its ethnically Chinese majority population. Bringing delegation members of other ethnicities also helps to show Singapore is distinct from China. Another avenue Singapore utilizes to show that it is not a vassal state of China is by engaging in defensive balancing, ensuring its armed forces are frequently upgraded with state-of-the-art Western weapons and technology, like the F-35 fighter jets purchase that match the current generation of fighters in China's Air Force. With Singapore's military being non-dependent on Chinese weaponry and technology, it takes away the opportunity for China to dictate how Singapore can utilize its military technology. Lastly, the Singaporean government has publicly spoken about several instances of possible state-sponsored attempts from China to interfere or influence Singapore's domestic politics, and has since introduced policies to safeguard against it, such as the FICA Act, which has been enacted before on individuals believed to be acting in the interests of China. Such legislation also sends a strong message to the Chinese that active measures are being adopted by the Singaporean government to guard against Chinese interference. Third, the principle of being a friend to all but an enemy to none is also applied in SG-China relations. This approach helps to position Singapore as a non-threatening actor to Chinese interests, which reduces the likelihood of China turning hostile towards Singapore. This can be seen in Singapore's strong advocacy in ASEAN unity and centrality in engaging with China, as evidenced by several dialogues mentioned below, that engage China with countries in the region. Singapore has also avoided taking stances that would draw the ire of China, such as Taiwanese independence, which China has described as the raiders of red lines. With Singapore being generally aligned with key Chinese positions, it has reaped the economic benefits by being in China's good books. Fourth, in light of increasing Chinese aggression, Singapore has remained steadfast in calling for a world order governed by the rule of law and international norms. With China having significant leverage due to its economic and military might, it can be emboldened to neglect laws and norms in pursuit of its interests. However, Singapore, who is a major beneficiary of the current world order, has sought to appeal to China to adhere to such law and norms, to resolve disputes and benefit from the current world order without resorting to military force. Singapore has been consistent in indirectly calling for China to adhere to UNCLOS, concerning its activities in the South China Sea. However, Singapore still lends support to China's Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure projects, as it does not involve the use of force. Lastly, Singapore, by portraying itself as a credible and consistent partner in its diplomatic methods, has allowed Singapore to be recognized by China as a trustworthy and constructive broker in the arena of international relations. Singapore has assisted China in various avenues in its diplomacy with other parties such as Western nations and also Taiwanese politicians by being a useful and unbiased intermediary facilitating dialogue and knowledge exchange. Such examples are the Shima and Wanghu meetings and the annual Shangri-La dialogue. Singapore's leaders have also been consulted by Chinese officials on their views on Western and Eastern geopolitical developments, which give weight to Singaporean interests and opinions. So, after expounding on the five principles, we can take a look on how the approach has impacted bilateral ties between the two nations. Despite some occasional tension arising from sensitive issues, Singapore has enjoyed warm ties with China, with President Xi Jinping recently remarking that bilateral relations have been elevated to an all round, high quality, future oriented partnership, and also a global model for countries to follow. In a statement by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, they have also expressed that they wish to keep to the general direction of current bilateral relations, which is a good sign in lieu of rising Chinese ambitions. In conclusion, it can be said in conclusion, it can be said that Singapore's foreign policy towards China cannot be explained by one fixed ideology or theory, but a blend of various but consistent set of principles. So here's a list of my references. Thank you.